Greetings and welcome to the budget analysis, a faith-based perspective. With us today is Dr. Abraham Rugo. He's a committed Christian, inspired by his own faith to give some of the reflections that he's going to be giving today. He's also a family man, married with 3 children. Began as a mathematician, mathematics and physics teacher, but entered into public management, for which he has gone through advanced study, and is presently the country manager of the International Budget Partnership. We hope that you'll enjoy our interaction together and draw insights from a faith-based perspective of analyzing the national budget.
First of all, is that my name Abraham Rugo, and I'm a born-again Christian, so that is something that I don't. I'm not apologetic about, and that means that I have a faith in Christ as a Redeemer of the world, and a God who cares about His world, even in its fallen nature. That forms a big part of what drives me to engage in, in engaging with economic systems, in governance systems, because I believe that that God desires that His people also enjoy their life on earth. So secondly, I think it's important to say that I am also a father and a husband. I have 3 children, 10, 5, and 2 months. And they also are an inspiration for me, because I'm always concerned about what kind of a world do they live in. So that also is a big inspiration. You notice I organize everything around all the things that inspire me.
No, that's fine. I think that's important.
Yes.
That's
important. I think it's important for us to appreciate that societies run through certain sets of statutes, laws, and policies. These statutes and laws, and basically big words, are in the context of a country like Kenya. What you will say is enshrined in the Constitution of Kenya, as passed in 2010, and the supporting legislation. Now, that supporting legislation or implementing legislation, because that's what put everything to the ground, is further again broken down in what you will call directives, administrative regulations, and the like. Now, the budget is one of those documents that then gets effected through a law. So you will not find anywhere in the Constitution that tells you how much money should be levied as taxes, or how much money should be spent in terms of expenditure on education, on agriculture, on what the Constitution does. And that's a good starting. It's an important starting point. Is that the Constitution does spell out what are the rights and responsibilities of different actors within the body politic of Kenya. So the chapter 1, just to run quickly, chapter 1 basically sets out the broad principles of who owns Kenya and who is delegated the power. So the supreme power, the sovereign power, is to the people. They delegate it to different institutions, and Article 10 provides the principles upon which and the values upon which the people delegated to should run those systems. Then by the time you get to chapter number 10, chapter 9 on parliament, and then you get to chapter 10 on the executive, and then the judiciary, and then devolution on chapter 11, then you are coming to institutions of power that are going to be given certain responsibility. Then chapter 12 then states how public finances shall be spent, and then how they shall be evaluated. And so why that is important is because we need to locate budget within the framework of the laws of the land. Now, why budgets become very important is because then they are they are one of the most critical instruments within the legal framework, because it is where resources get allocated to what are considered the priorities of the government. So when governments are seeking to be given responsibility, so basically like now we have elections coming here, they are going to be different people seeking to form the next government. They are going to state, this is what I shall do for you, the people. In other words, if you elect me, this is where I will apply your resources. This is where I will utilize your taxes, and these are the things that you should expect to get from me. And therefore, assessing any budget, assessing any document of how resources are spent and what they are spent on and what is collected and the like, is to the extent that they then are, to be honest, faithful to the creed or to the agreement. We call it in in political science, the social contract. There's an implicit agreement between the people and their government that this is what we shall do as the people. We shall give you our taxes, our money, our trust, our support. But on the other hand, you shall give us the following: you shall give us good quality education, you shall give us good quality healthcare. So when we look at the budget for 2021, so important is that then therefore the budget becomes something that is a continuous cycle. It has no start, no end per se, because then from the day then the body Kenya became, there has been a budget in one form or another. We can debate as to whether it has been a budget for the people, that involves the people, that responds to the people. That's all debatable, but there has been a budget every other year. So when you look at the budget of 2021, 2022, and I think it's also important to say that every year the budget is prepared for the coming financial year. Now, our financial year is between the period July and June, so July 1st to June 30th. Now, that's the financial year of the government, and the government here meaning the national government as well as county governments. But there are three things that are happening at the same time, which I think as part of just preliminary is important to underscore. One is that the budget for the following financial year is being prepared. So right now we are just at the tail end of having the budget for 2021, 2022 approved, which then should be ready, because then the starting date is basically next week. I think Wednesday or Thursday, 1st of July. But then we are also implementing the budget for the current financial year of 2020-2021 that will be ending on 30th of June. But thirdly, we are evaluating the previous budget that ended on June 30th of 2020. So at every point, there are three processes that, now, why are these three processes important when we are thinking about how a budget is faithful to what it's supposed to be doing? It's that we evaluate what we did before, and we should be able to answer the question, what more should we do? What less should we do? How differently should we do it? But then as we implement right now, there is also the question of, are we spending on what we set to spend on? We call it budget credibility. If we said we are going to spend 50 billion on education, are we spending that money on education? If we said we are going to spend 20 billion on response to COVID by providing cash transfers to the vulnerable and people who have lost their jobs, are we spending that money on those people? And of course, we can come to the discussion of, first of all, are those people the rightful people to be spent on, and whether they actually receive what they are entitled, in that sense. But then as we prepare the coming budget, we are also asking the question of, is that budget going to continue being responsive to the needs of our people? And therefore, what are the needs of our people? The needs of our people, as I've said, first of all, they're informed by the Bill of Rights. But currently, when you look at the budget, what are we spending on? And we can answer the question whether that is, that's what we should be spending on. So the top four big items of expenditure are: one, public debt servicing. If that was a ministry, it will actually be the leading ministry, taking the lion's share of our debt, taking almost more than 30% of the budget itself, because it's about $1 trillion. Then the second one is defense, security. Basically, all the organs of security. It's a huge one. The third one is education, and for the very reason that the Teacher Service Commission takes quite a fair portion of resources. The fourth one is infrastructure. The ministry responsible for infrastructure. The fifth one is counties. Devolution, basically, if you were to put them in order of how they spend, the fifth one will be counties, basically all the 47 counties.
So we have 30% going to paying back debt. So out of every shilling, ideally that the government has, 30 cents goes to paying back debt. What are the proportions for the others?
There are two yeah, I can give you. So basically, out of 30 shillings that we plan to spend, out of 100 shillings that we plan to spend, about 30 shillings will go to paying debt. Then you have, because that's at about 1.1, in the coming financial year, it's going to be at about 1.1 trillion out of a budget of about 3.6 trillion. So you see where the 30% is basically coming from. That's how much we plan to spend. When we come to how much we actually plan to collect,
that's a different thing.
It's actually at 66 shillings out of every 100 shillings. Now, and I think that discussion, we'll come to that discussion in a minute. Then when you take something like security, which basically is taking another about 700 or thereabout billion, that takes you again another about 15% or 20% or thereabout. Then so the percentages go down as you basically everything else is crumbling down there. But I use that as an illustration that should tell you that as far as priorities are concerned, our biggest priority right now is servicing our public debt. Now, is that what we should be spending resources on? Because then that asks, so why did we incur this debt? And for what was that debt spent on? Of course, the debt has been spent on building roads, on agriculture services, on ICT, laying the fiber cables and everything, and connectivity, and what have you. But it has also been spent, unfortunately, also in servicing salaries, and paying, because it's borrowing and publicly guaranteed debt, which includes any overdrafts, any short-term expenditures that has happened. So that already starts to give you a picture of where we are spending on and what we are spending spending on. I think the bigger question to ask in that, therefore, when you think about an accurate assessment, thinking about people have said it's a guesswork. The question is, when you look at how much we plan to get as income versus how much we plan to spend, because that's where it boils down to. That is where there's the biggest dilemma. Let me show you the numbers, how they look. So according to the projections of the National Treasury, is that we expect to collect about 2 trillion. Of which the ordinary revenue is about 1.8 trillion. Now, our budget is 3.6 trillion. In other words, we only expect an income of half our budget. Now, remember, this is an estimation, because this is not money you have in your pocket. Just like you're not paid upfront when you do your job, you're paid after you do your job. Taxes are expected to be collected through the year. So it's not something that you're already assured that you will collect. You're just making projections based on what you collected previously. Now, what has previous example showed us is that we have missed our targets. On average, at about 10% of the target is never met. Especially now that we have challenges with COVID, and therefore then you start questioning how trustworthy, how true, how realistic are we being, in terms of, spending twice. So in other words, we are just increasing our liability by the fact that we will have to borrow more, and when you look at the picture, it gets even more scary. Let me come back to the ratios I talked about earlier. So you expect to collect 1.8 trillion. Debt is part of three other items that are normally lumped together in costs that we call the consolidated fund services. Now, that's just a big name to say there are charges, there are expenses that are fast charge. Now, a good example, when you Fuliza with your M-Pesa account, What happens is that if somebody sends you money to your account, the first thing Safaricom does is that they deduct what you owe them. Now, consolidated fund services are the same. They are fast charge and they are non-discretionary. So it's not something that you can choose to spend on or not to spend on. There are three items: public debt, pensions, and expenses incurred by constitutional offices and commissions. Because we said that for our constitutional offices and commissions, we don't want them to be at the mercy of the executive. We want them to have independent budgets so that then they can be able to do their independent job. Now, the total of those three is at about 1.3 trillion. In other words, out of the 1.8 that we expect to collect, only 500 billion will be left for everything else I have said. Now, remove, for instance, just county allocations, which is 370 billion. You are left with 130 billion. Now, that 130 billion, do you take it to security? Do you take it to education? Do you take it to healthcare? Do you take it to all these? And my friend, that's why I say that there is a sense in which the accuracy, how faithful what we are, budgeting for doesn't add up. And that has been a big challenge. That basically we are eating what we don't have, and hoping that things will get better, but they seem to be getting only worse. And feel free to interject me where you think I need to clarify.
So I mean, yeah. So far, we're talking about, okay, is the budget able to do what it says it's going to do? And just that quick overview of the numbers seems to suggest that no, even from the point of, is there the money to actually do what it says it's supposed to do? So for that reason, alone, I mean, even if we didn't discuss anything else, we have a challenge over there that must be addressed. But let me move you along and ask the question Okay. Again, and you can go back to the same numbers or even give us other examples. But as people of faith, one of the things that we're going to say, okay, is this thing truthful? Is it going to do what it's supposed to do? But a second one, which is very related to that, is to say, is it good use of the money? I mean, if one gave you the 100 shillings and you used it in that particular way, is it good use of the money? If one were to give you 1,000 shillings and you are paying back 300 of that on debt, would that be good stewardship? I think that's the question that I'm bringing to. From your perspective, what would you say?
So how do I assess whether this is good use of money? So one of the things that I would use to assess is that, as I've said, people have needs. And the essence of public services is that public needs are met through a public means. In other words, we don't come to Kiama and ask him to give us 1,000 shillings so that we can run a dispensary in Kilimambogo ward. We already have gotten money from Kiama through taxation, and therefore we should be able to run the the system and provide the various services. Secondly, I think there is a whole responsibility, and Article 201 of the Constitution on public finance talks about this very issue of stewardship. Talks about the whole essence of whatever decisions are being made today should have a fair consideration of their implications, both cost and benefits to the current and future generation, as it were. Now, but there are two things that I think we find that one, in terms of the items being selected for focus, you find that more often than not, they are the items that we all want spending on. So you want to see better roads, you want accessibility, you want to see a better education system, And therefore you want, when your children go to school, you want to find that there's a teacher, there are equipments, and there's everything. We want, when you go to hospital, at a minimum, find a doctor and a qualified one, find a nurse and the like, and find they have the necessary equipment, and as well they also have the drugs and any aftercare that you may require. When you go to a police station, you want to find at least a policeman or woman to be able to take your issues, but you also want to find a fair investigation of your matter. And when it is finally concluded and taken to the judge, you also want to find a competent judge. But I feel like the stewardship agenda has been shot on the foot by two main challenges. One is that the personal interest packaged in the form of corruption and rent seeking has meant that a lot of the costs that we incur are either inflated or never spent for the items for which they are spent on. For instance, when you think about the level of public debt that we currently have, which we estimate at about 9 trillion Kenya shillings, already at the very ceiling of what Parliament allowed to be borrowed, in an economy of about 10 trillion, in other words, meaning that you have actually borrowed and put into the economy about 90% the worth of that economy, then there's a lot of changes you should be seeing in that particular economy. There's a lot of, I know roads have been opened in many places, but also you may have noticed that this has also been accompanied by massive scandals and corruption scandals affecting different. You hear Ministry of Health, 5 billion. I don't know whether that case was ever concluded. We talked about the dams. We have a number of PSs from some of those ministries already in court. And therefore, I feel that we are spending so much more now, but assuring so very little gain for the future generation. In other words, we are spending more for less, if I was to use it in that language. But it's not that the targeting is wrong, because when you read the budget documents and you read most of our policy documents, they all say the things you want to hear, Kema. I have not met a document that basically says we are going to spend resources, building mansions for a select few and all those things. The language is what you want to hear, but the prudence and the trust upon which we have for our people has not. But the second one is that public means is often seen as a way of channeling and pulling resources out of the system for purposes of gain, whether that gain is communal, whether that gain is family, whether that gain is regional. And a good example is that every weekend we have all these hundreds of fundraisers where any committee you sit in for fundraising. I don't know if it happens in other countries or it's just a peculiarity of Kenya. The majority of the people we are thinking about inviting as guests of honor are people in public service. Now, my reading and looking at the salary scales for people in public service do not suggest to me that they have that much money, but where do we expect them to be getting this money? And every weekend they are in fundraisers across MPs, and any MP who will be open will tell you the amount of money they have to give on. Is that the way to provide public services? And many times they are giving for healthcare, they are giving for education, they are giving for provision of basic food and things. But yet these are policy questions that one would fix using the same public resources to be able to make sure that there's a nurse and there are drugs and people can be treated, so that we are not always having to treat people through fundraisers of sending them to India and to all these places. So for me, the stewardship question has been curtailed by those two main, the outright corruption, but also the expectation that you can gain privately, even individual citizens, they can gain privately from public resources. So people want their own man, they want their own woman, they want their person to go there. And in fact, the men and women who get into those positions and do not bring goodies back to their village or back to their regions are punished so very thoroughly, because they have not they are not giving us access to government, to public resources. So for me, that's my response. That stewardship
Yeah.
has been curtailed by the fact that the spending does not necessarily follow the formal channel, as it were.
So if I'm to summarize what you said, in reading the budget, you will not see the stewardship question is not immediately evident. But because all the right things, there's healthcare, there's education. If you look at it, it will say all the right things. Even for us as people of faith to say, well, yeah, at least the priorities, we can discuss about the proportion and everything, but the priorities are there. But it's not when it comes to implementation, the history that we have of how we operate, the stewardship itself is curtailed. The money may be allocated
at implementation,
but it is curtailed at implementation. Let me move us along and ask the other question and see. So a budget, the budget, as you said, is constitutionally, it's part of the framework of the social contract that we have with ourselves, actually, with ourselves to have a structure of governance providing for our specific rights as members of the country. The question that I want to ask is the justice question, to ask, reading from what you see from the budget, is this something? Is it fair? Does it cater to all of us from the way it is written? And also, again, you can make a comment about how its implementation is, because, like you said, there are a number of things happening at the same time at any one calendar time. But also to ask the question which you don't often ask. I suppose any instrument that's supposed to care for us as a nation should encourage good behavior, but also discourage errant behavior. Is there anything that we can see in the budget and the policies, the policy structure that is there, that will reward people who are doing the right thing and will punish or disincentivize the thieves, all those, or even those who engage in socially destructive behavior, excessive drinking and those kinds of things?
It's good that you brought this question, because the question of fairness and equity is a critical question to ask. Now, and the only way you get to answer that question is, first of all, to look at what kind of society are you trying to build, and on what foundation are you building it. So the reality of a country like Kenya is that you're talking of having about 80% of your population being below 40 years of age. So you're majority young population. But you're also talking of a country where a majority of the land is, a good portion of the land is arable or can be made arable. Because we no longer talk about land that is just arable naturally, because there are also means of making non-arable land arable. In that sense, in other words, it can be cultivated. You're also talking about a fairly young generation, a young population. Of the 80% I'm talking about, a majority are actually below 20 years of age of that. And therefore, you basically are talking of a society that is almost at the middle of its growth in terms of the focal area. And therefore, you want to see, are we actually targeting our spending? And I will come to the other questions that you ask. Are we targeting our spending on such people? One of the things I wanted to say is that in trying to be fair, or in trying to be equitable, at least at the face of it, we have split the resources and almost commoditized or personalized our means of expenditure and our means of engagement. And this is because of what I said earlier, that we have a system that is almost organized around individual politicians or individual government officials. Let me give you an example. So the members of parliament are responsible for actually approving and providing oversight of this 3.6 trillion budget that I have just talked about. But it will shock you that the thing that they worry most is just about 45 billion or thereabout of that whole amount. Now, why they worry about that amount is because that is the amount that it goes directly to them, and it goes through what we call the National Constituency Development Fund and the Affirmative Action Fund, that is for the women members of parliament who represent the counties. And it's like once that is granted, then everything else can flow. Everything else can have its way. And there's a lot of debate as to how that resource. What you don't see is that you don't see proper targeting, for instance. So we run the system of budgeting that we run in this country is called program-based budgeting. That's just a big word to mean that we try to come from the need before we allocate resources. So we say, for instance, we have 100,000 children that need to transit from class 8 to high school, for instance. How much money, in the past, we have only transited about 70% of those children. So in the next 1 year, we want to transit at least 80% of those who graduate, and increasingly up to get to the 100% transition. So how much will that cost? And therefore we work backwards. So we start with the need, then we come to the resources. But often when you read through our program-based budgets, you don't see a very clear connection between what we are trying to achieve and the resources Instead, we go and we start doing what we almost consider to be equal distribution. So you find that at the county level, they say we have 30 wards and therefore let's allocate 20 million to each ward. And then when we come to the bursaries, we have 1,000 applications, we have 1 million. So let's give each of them 1,000 shillings. Now, when you give a child 1,000 shillings for bursary, what are you saying? And yet their school fees is 20,000 shillings. So, and that's where the equity discussion, the fairness discussion gets curtailed. But secondly, is that, and we have had a lot of improvement on this, is that for a long time, our development also has still followed the structure that was already there. So that basically giving more to those who have, and sometimes almost taking away from those who do not have. So right now, I'm saying that is a big improvement because there are many parts of this country that now are accessible. And in that sense, therefore, then the resources that they try to they need to be able to open up their places. So, for instance, you can now comfortably drive all the way from Nairobi to Marsabit without much of a hassle because there's a good road, there's an airport. In Isiolo and a couple other places. In other words, there's a bit of an opening of a road. You can drive from Garissa, all the way from Mombasa to Garissa again on a fairly reasonable functional road, and all those. In other words, that is already starting to deal with a lot of the inequality. But when you come to investments, for instance, in education, that basically ensure that we have more transition to programs that fit different categories of people, there's still a big challenge there. We've converted, for instance, our middle level colleges to universities. Not everybody needs to go to university, as it were. When you go even to more sectoral groups, more specific groups like persons with disabilities, persons facing different kind of challenges, persons coming from ethnic minorities, or persons coming from extremely poor backgrounds, unless where they have basically benefited from acts of charity, the opportunities for advancement are minimal. You all then asked me, does this budget actually encourage good behavior, in terms of encouraging people, us to celebrate and to focus, and in fact, if I may, to not steal from the system? That's a difficult question to answer. But let me say two things. One is that we have a culture that does not seemingly celebrate people who do the right thing. And this seems to cut across board. I just asked a question at the very beginning, which I think is important for us to reflect on. Majority of the fundraisers that attract these government officials are within a church context. does anybody sit back and ask, this person, an MCA's salary is not more than 200,000. Add their allowances, a few allowances here and there, give and take 400,000, make it even 500,000. Pay tax of 30% of that and leave them with about 350,000. They have a family, they have their own expenditures, they have all these things they need to do. But every weekend, we expect them in 2-3 fundraisers. We expect them to contribute to 5-10 families that have been bereaved, and also contribute to different people. And their total expenditure is coming, if you put it all together, it's coming to 1 million shillings per month. Where do they get this extra money? And what businesses do they run? And therefore, because of that, I, for one, almost convinced that our budget seems to actually encourage the bad guys. There seems to be a very clear connection between the kind of budgets that never get even reduced, even when there is no money, and the tendering processes. The tendering processes and the people who do those businesses. There's for instance, when you look at the kind of projects being done and the kind of monies being spent by persons in public offices, and then you think, for instance, what the president was talking about, 2 billion shillings is lost every day. You almost put one for one together, and realize that perhaps this is where we are actually, this one person has used the language of budgeted corruption, that because it's budgeted for, we are going to still spend on it, even if it does not make sense. Let me use another example, which sometimes is, I find it sometimes unfair, but it says a lot. In this month, in the month of June, it is almost impossible to get public officials at every level available in their offices. Now, the reason is, sadly, COVID has messed up a couple of those things, and lack of resources has also even made it even worse. But basically what happens is that there's normally a rush hour to basically try and spend as much as practically possible before the financial year comes to an end. The mad rush starts in May and gets worse in June. Because by 30th of June, whatever you have not spent gets reallocated, basically, in that sense. So I feel that even where we have a fair, even where we have an intention to have a system that is fair, a system that is serving all people, the way we have organized our spending and our expectations on how these entitlements get delivered to us encourages more impropriety than a proper spending. And I'm sure you may have heard of people who are very unpopular. People are even saying, we will not even re-elect that guy. He eats alone. She eats alone. It's not that he eats alone or she eats alone. The problem is that they actually don't steal. Because how else can you explain the amounts of money that sometimes we see being distributed across? How do you explain the all of a sudden wealth, that seemingly seems to accompany persons once they are in office? So that's my answer to that question.
Yeah, and I think finally, just to ask the question, we can expect the legal framework and the constitutional framework in the country to try and legislate certain things, but as a society, the society will hold together if there is a sense of morality. Just a moment. Yeah. The society will hold together. The society will hold together if there's a sense of morality. Question that I would want them to ask is, related to this, and to ask the question, in the budget that we looked at, this last budget that we looked at, does the budget encourage moral practices? For example, what's its impact on the vulnerable? And you've touched on that just now. When it seems to when our expenditure seems to promote corrupt behavior, then obviously the people, the most vulnerable, the orphans, widows, destitute, the aged, the disabled, are the ones who suffer the most. But yeah, just to ask the question, does the budget encourage morality? Or even a bigger question, is the budget moral? Does it avail resources in some way to somehow facilitate the things in society that sustain morality, families, education institutions, religious institutions, and so on? And then the other side is, does it disincentivize, immoral behavior? And I think you've alluded to it in one sense, but then I think there are other moral pillars as well in society. And from your view, what do you see from the budget that was read? And I think we must ask that question, because that is not a question that will be asked in other spaces. As people of faith, we have to keep asking that question, and we cannot expect a legal structure to answer the question of morality.
Thank you. Well, and definitely, it's a question that we need to grapple with. Not the easiest of them, but let me give my perspective. One is that perhaps everything I have said may sound like the budget is only about spending, but let's also remember the budget is we also budget for what we will raise. So you have a gap of, as I mentioned earlier, you have a gap of half your budget. So you plan to spend 100 shillings, but the only money you can comfortably or realistically say you are likely to collect or get is 50 bob. So you need to find the extra 50 shillings. So first of all is that then what will happen is that you have to raise these 50 shillings. And how do you raise these 50 shillings? You raise these 50 shillings in two ways. One, you either borrow. So you go again and say, I was here last year, I'm back here again, I'll borrow from you. Now, when government borrows, basically what it's saying, it is committing its future taxes to that person it has borrowed from. Whether that person is Mugambi, who has bought treasury bills and bonds, or that person is JP and Morgan Bank in the US, or whoever out there, or the World Bank, or whoever else we borrow from. But secondly, is that it raises taxes. So you've seen the headlines today. Members of parliament have said, no, we are not going to tax these people further than this. In other words, you put the burden on the very people who depend most on the very services, that you are not providing in one way or another. But that's where the moral question comes in. Do you basically put unnecessary and undue pressure on people who are already vulnerable? And a good example is a majority of Kenyans survive on an income of about 200 at most, about 100 to 200 shillings per day. Now, there are others who will make as much as 1,000 shillings, as much as 2,000 shillings per day, in the same, but those are very few people. Majority are between, maximum 500. And 500, you're saying 500 times 30, basically, you're talking of people who earn about 15,000 shillings a month. And you can go into other numbers higher than that, up to 1,000 shillings. But 1,000 shillings is already somebody earning 30,000. So majority will be in that range. Now, if a person who earns 100 shillings goes and buys bread worth 55 shillings, of which so basically they have spent 55 shillings of their income on bread. And that bread already has a percentage of, say, has 16% VAT, for instance, or some of the products used in producing it already are taxed VAT. You're saying basically that they have spent 16 shillings out of 100 shillings in taxation, if you think about it in that way, or 8 shillings depending. Now, if somebody else has 1,000 shillings, 8 shillings out of 1,000 is a very small amount compared to 8 shillings out of 100. So it is the people who are poorer and weak that end up bearing the greater brunt of the society. But let's put it on the other side. When again, it's the poor who depend almost entirely on public services. So they are the ones who go to their dispensaries. Many of us don't even know where our nearest dispensary is because we've never even gone there. When we are unwell, we rush to a private hospital. But there are people who that is their only source of treatment. Some even it's only the community health worker they depend on. So when that dispensary, and I have seen this practically, when that dispensary is not functional, either because it doesn't have a nurse posted to it, or the nurse is regularly there, or there are no drugs and things like that. So you find that such people then become they are the ones who suffer most, and to that extent, then the moral question about the budgeting framework, then it's brought to question. But secondly, is that by compartmentalizing the budget, you create more cause for pain. And this is what I mean. So the budget is supposed to make sure that you can be able to provide public goods across board. But what has ended up happening is that we have tried to create a small fund for every other special thing we consider special need. What that does is that it splits the budget into so many small pieces that you can never achieve the common whole out of it. So, for instance, you have some money within CDF for making roads. You have some money to counties for making roads. You have some money to to the ministry for making roads. And although then you have a couple of, I think, 3 or 4 institutions that are responsible for making roads, for rural roads, for urban roads, for highways, and the like. You go to water. You have almost 10 bodies that are dealing with something water. And then you go to electricity production, for instance, you again have so many. So what happens is that you never achieve the common whole, but you end up still charging the person who is not receiving this common whole for the entire package. And what I mean by the entire package, if you looked at your electricity bill, you'll notice there are about 6 or 7 taxes that are charged with every electricity bill. About 30% of the electricity bill actually goes to those kind of taxes, to warma, to fuel adjustment, there are quite a number. But does everybody access electricity and to the quality and the quantity they need at every point? Some they don't access because they cannot afford it, but others don't access it because it's also they're just power interruptions all the other. I think that's the way I would approach the moral question, that yes, there's an advancement, and I think it is important for us to appreciate. But there's a way in which things can be consolidated and coordinated even much better to be able to achieve the common good. And by achieving the common good, then you only come to address the peculiarities of the different categories within a society. But if you start with the other way around, then you never achieve the common good. Because first you need to have everybody have access to school, then now you can start making provision. You can make provision for those who need school with Braille, but it cannot be that even those who need Braille cannot access even the basic education in the first place. Yeah.
Good. I think we've covered some good ground here, and I think the reason why it's important for us to do this is to say. I think we began by talking about the framework within which the budgetary process fits in, and the social, political, contract that we have with one another requires that our country be governed in a certain way, and that we live with a certain proximity with one another, and we create structures that then care for us. I think that's what we began by saying. But then now, at the end, what we've asked are questions about how is that done, and the framework that we've put over ourselves is one that needs to be interrogated. And one of the institutions that can do that are people of faith, religious people. And we're saying, based on what we know about our faith, what are the things that we can come in and ask the question? I think that's what we've done. And we've said that even though, and I'm saying this by way of summary as we conclude, that by way of summary is to say there has been some improvement in terms of, for example, some of the development that we've seen, some of the structures that have been put to create equitable development through the country. Now we can go to places that were when we were growing up, they were called what? Northern. Before we were born, they were called Northern Frontier. The frontier districts now are no longer frontier districts. They're actually, within the country. You can actually drive there. It's, a matter of hours, not weeks, to get to some of the farthest parts of this country. Things like those. But then to say that we have not seen in this last budget, we have not, there are certain ways in which the budget has not been realistic, it has not been faithful. The stewardship is wanting on the implementation side. And we've talked about the justice question, and also, now concluded with the ethic or the moral problem. Yeah. And what we're saying is, when you read the budget, it says the right things. By and large, and what I hear you say is that there are certain issues with how it is written, and there are certain issues with how it is implemented. And there's something that you mentioned there we didn't talk, and maybe that could be the concluding thought that I would like you to reflect on, which is we have expectations, what I'm going to call extra budgetary expectations.
Yes.
Where we expect our members to give money. So maybe a quick parting shot.
I think first of all is that we owe it to ourselves to increasingly subject our way of raising and spending resources to a realistic frame of what we can do with the resources that are available. I think it is a high time, particularly the people of faith, also engage with the question of what is the right development approach for a country like Kenya. When you read through the scriptures, you see even the people engaged in different assignment and tasks that were relevant for their time. Whether it is those whose job was to build the temple, or to rebuild the temple, or to rebuild the walls. They had different tasks, that they were given at different points. I think we need to investigate what is the right development approach. What is it that we should focus on as a people? Because a lot of the models that we discuss and we engage with are developed elsewhere for other people. But then we take them and we say, no, we need to be putting in so much money. Should we, for instance, it's not a bad question, but should we, for instance, be pouring all our money on infrastructure, or should we be pouring it on education? Could it be that we are actually headed to a society where it will not matter whether you can move around or not, but what matters is whether you're connected to the rest of the world or not? So the issue is not so much whether you can get to Mombasa or not, but whether you are connected to somebody in Mombasa who is connected to somebody in Lagos, who is connected to somebody in New York. And therefore, what kind of a world should we be preparing ourselves and our society for? Lest we spend so much of our money on things that will be basically obsolete, beautiful to see, but of little value. So, and then secondly, I think is a charge for as many of us as can practically be involved in this process to lend our eyes, lend our ears, not just be keyboard warriors where we complain, and fight, but let's come out there. Share your perspective. Who knows? Your perspective might just be the solution that everybody is looking for. So thank you very much for having me. I hope this has been insightful. The questions are difficult, I must say, because it's not a frame we have analyzed budgets against, but I think it's a good starting point.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Dr. Rugo.